Ever sent money overseas and thought, ugh, there has got to be a better way?
Yeah, I hear you.
You're not alone. That's actually kind of how this whole idea of distributed payment networks got started.
Right.
These systems are all about cutting out the middleman.
No banks.
No banks, no hefty fees.
Just fast and direct transactions.
Exactly, between users anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
So today we're diving deep into one system that's making waves. The Ripple protocol.
It's a fascinating one.
Yeah. Are you ready to decode how it actually works?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So to really understand Ripple, we first need to grasp the core challenges that any distributed payment system faces.
It's kind of like a three-legged stool.
Okay.
You need correctness,
Okay.
meaning every transaction has to be legitimate.
Right.
You need agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone on the network has to agree on a single, universally accepted record of those transactions.
So no discrepancies.
Exactly. And of course, you need utility. The system has to be fast and efficient enough to be practical for people to use.
It's got to work seamlessly.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the hurdles.
The big challenge.
How does Ripple even begin to clear them?
Well, they've developed this really intriguing consensus algorithm.
Okay.
It's basically a set of rules that helps the network agree on which transactions are valid and which ones aren't.
So it helps bring order to the chaos.
You got it.
Yeah.
And it's specifically designed to tackle those challenges we just talked about head on.
Okay, consensus algorithm.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of complex.
It can be a bit much, yeah.
Could you break that down for us a little?
Absolutely. Imagine a group of generals
Okay.
trying to coordinate an attack on a city.
Mm-hmm.
But some of those generals might be traitors sending false information.
Oh, okay.
That's actually the classic Byzantine generals problem analogy.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a famous one. And it relates directly to distributed systems like Ripple.
So how does it connect?
Well, in a distributed payment network, you have all these servers. They're kind of like the generals in our story.
Okay.
They need to reach a consensus on which transactions are legit,
Right.
even if some servers are compromised or maybe even outright malicious.
Okay. I'm starting to see the parallel.
Right.
So it's not just about preventing like crashes or glitches.
No, it's much more than that.
It's about stopping bad actors from gaming the system.
Yeah, think of it like a digital fortress.
Right.
You got to protect it from invaders.
So they're trying to make it hack-proof.
As hack-proof as possible. Now, the real question is, how do you know which generals to trust in this scenario?
That's a good question because anyone could be a bad actor, right?
Exactly. And that's where this thing called the unique node list, or UNL, comes in.
Okay, UNL.
Think of it as each server's carefully curated buddy list of other servers that they trust.
So like their inner circle.
Exactly. And this UNL plays a big role in Ripple's consensus algorithm.
Gotcha. So before we get into that, though,
Yeah.
we need to understand two other key concepts.
Okay.
The last closed ledger and the open ledger.
Yes. Those are fundamental.
So what are those exactly?
So the last closed ledger,
Okay.
it's like the official record of the entire network,
Okay.
like the most recently agreed upon state of all accounts and transactions.
Gotcha.
And then the open ledger is where new transactions are proposed,
Mm-hmm.
but they haven't been finalized yet.
Okay, so it's kind of like a two-step process.
Yeah.
First, transactions are proposed in the open ledger.
Right.
And then if they're validated,
If they check out.
they become part of the official last closed ledger.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a good way to visualize it.
Yeah, it helps to think of it like that.
So now let's dive into how Ripple's consensus algorithm actually works.
You ready to get into the nitty-gritty?
Let's do it.
Okay, so it's officially called the RPCA,
RPCA,
and it's a multi-round process.
multi-round. Okay.
So first, each server looks at all the transactions it's aware of
Okay.
and puts the valid ones into a candidate set.
Candidate set.
Think of it as their proposal for what should be added to the ledger.
Okay, so they're all putting their bids in.
Exactly. Like, here's what I think should be on the permanent record.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. Then in the next round,
Okay.
each server checks the candidate sets from everyone on their UNL,
Right.
their buddy list,
Their buddy list?
and votes on whether they think each transaction in those sets is legitimate or not.
Okay, so it's kind of like a majority rules situation.
It is similar to that, but with a twist.
Oh, a twist. Okay.
To make it into that final last closed ledger,
Right.
a transaction needs at least 80% agreement from the servers in the very final round.
80%. That seems pretty strict.
It is a high bar.
What's the thinking behind that?
Well, that 80% rule combined with that careful URL selection we talked about,
Right.
that's Ripple's main way of tackling that correctness challenge we discussed earlier.
Ah, I see, to make sure only legit transactions get through.
Exactly. It's designed to make it really, really difficult for fraudulent transactions to slip through.
So if I'm picking my UNL carefully, I'm increasing the odds that I'm only dealing with trustworthy generals.
You got it. It's like surrounding yourself with a council of wise advisors.
Right. But what if, despite all this, a few bad transactions still manage to sneak in?
It's a good question.
Is the whole system doomed?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Ripple has some built-in safeguards to limit the damage.
Like what?
So one key factor is this thing called the probability of correctness.
Probability of correctness.
And this isn't just about how many malicious actors are out there trying to mess things up.
Okay.
It's also about how likely those actors are to actually team up and collude to really do some damage.
So a coordinated attack.
Exactly. The more diverse and independent your UNL is,
Right.
the lower the chances of a coordinated attack actually succeeding.
Ah, that makes sense.
Right. So choosing your UNL wisely isn't just about trusting individual servers.
Right.
It's also about making sure those servers aren't all in cahoots with each other.
So it's like diversifying your portfolio, but with trust.
That's a great analogy. But even with a carefully chosen UNL,
Yeah.
couldn't you still end up with different groups of servers, reaching different conclusions about which transactions are valid and which ones aren't?
Right, because they might have different UNLs themselves.
Exactly. And that brings us to the agreement challenge and the potential for something called a fork.
Oh, a fork. What's that?
Okay, so imagine two groups of servers with very different UNLs.
Okay.
They might end up disagreeing on which transactions are legitimate,
Right.
which leads to two completely different conflicting versions of the ledger.
Oh, that sounds like a major headache.
It'll be a huge problem.
Yeah. So we definitely need one undisputed record.
Absolutely one single source of truth.
How does Ripple prevent these forks from happening?
That's where overlap between those UNLs becomes absolutely crucial.
Okay, overlap.
If there are enough servers that are shared between different groups,
Right.
it becomes much harder for those groups to drift apart and create a fork.
So it's kind of like making sure all the generals are at least talking to some of the same people,
Yeah.
even if they don't all trust each other completely.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
Even if some bad actors are in that overlap, the system can still stay in sync as long as there are enough honest servers to counter their influence.
Wait, so a few traitorous generals can be in the mix.
It can handle a few bad apples.
But as long as the good guys outnumber them, the system will still work.
That's the idea.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It's a testament to how robust the system is.
Yeah, for sure.
But remember, we've only covered two legs of that three-legged stool,
Right.
correctness and agreement.
Right.
We still need to talk about utility.
Oh, right.
How Ripple makes sure all of this happens quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, because a system that takes forever to process a transaction
Right.
isn't really going to revolutionize global payments.
Definitely not.
So how does Ripple ensure things actually run smoothly?
That comes down to something called convergence.
Convergence.
And this is all about reaching decisions within a reasonable time frame.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Think of it like a busy intersection.
Okay.
If the traffic lights are slow or poorly coordinated,
Right.
everything gets backed up.
Yeah. Total gridlock.
Exactly. Ripple wants to make sure the traffic of transactions is flowing smoothly.
So how do they avoid those crypto traffic jams?
Well, they've got some pretty clever mechanisms built in
Okay.
to keep things moving.
Like what?
For one, Ripple's constantly monitoring server response times.
Okay.
If a server's consistently lagging behind, it gets flagged and can even be temporarily removed from UNLs.
So it's like they're weeding out the slowpokes.
Exactly. Got to keep the network running at optimal speed.
Right. So you're not waiting forever for your transaction to go through.
Exactly. And there are a few other tricks up their sleeve, too.
Oh, really? Like what?
For example, there's a 2-second window for initial proposals in each round. So this ensures that only servers with decent speeds can even participate.
Makes sense.
Prevents those sluggish servers from holding everything up.
It's like setting a minimum speed limit on the crypto highway.
I like that analogy.
Anything else they do to keep things running smoothly?
Oh, yeah. They've also got ways to identify and flag malicious nodes
Okay.
based on their voting patterns.
Oh, interesting. So, like, if they're consistently voting no on every transaction.
Exactly. That's a red flag.
Right, because they're probably trying to disrupt the network.
It's like they're looking for suspicious behavior.
Right, like someone constantly slamming on the brakes for no reason.
You got it. So they're filtering out the bad actors.
Right.
And the slowpokes.
Very clever. So now you might be thinking, this all sounds super technical.
Yeah, I can see how someone might think that.
How does this actually affect me?
Right. Like, what's the real-world impact here?
Exactly. So let's bring it back down to earth.
Okay.
Imagine you're sending money to a family member overseas.
A common scenario.
Right. With traditional systems, it can take days, involve hefty fees.
Oh, yeah.
And you're kind of at the mercy of multiple intermediaries.
Not to mention all the paperwork.
It's a headache.
It really is.
With Ripple, the goal is to make those cross-border payments near instantaneous.
Much faster.
With minimal fees.
Way cheaper.
And because it's not reliant on a single central authority.
That's a key difference.
It could potentially offer financial services to people who don't even have access to traditional banking.
It's about financial inclusion.
Okay, now that's where it gets really exciting.
That's the big picture.
We're talking about potentially revolutionizing global finance.
That's the goal.
Making it more inclusive and efficient.
It's a powerful vision.
It is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
It's important to remember that Ripple, like any system, has its limitations.
No system is perfect.
Right. There's no such thing as a perfect system.
And one of the main criticisms leveled at Ripple is that it's not truly decentralized.
Wait, I thought we were talking about a distributed network.
We are.
What's the issue?
The issue is with those UNLs we discussed earlier.
Right, the buddy lists.
Exactly. So critics argue that since those UNLs are ultimately curated by individuals or organizations,
Okay.
it introduces a level of centralization.
So it's not as decentralized as, say, Bitcoin,
That's the argument some people make.
where anyone can theoretically join the network and participate in the consensus process.
Exactly. And that raises questions about transparency and accountability.
Right, like how are those UNLs actually chosen?
Yeah, that's a big question.
What's to stop someone from stacking their UNL with servers they control?
It's a valid concern.
Essentially rigging the system in their favor.
That's the worry.
That's a worrying thought.
It is something to consider.
Does Ripple address those concerns at all?
They do.
Okay.
They offer a default UNL,
Okay.
which they claim is designed to be diverse and trustworthy.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual user to decide who they trust.
So it puts the onus on the user to do their homework and choose their buddies wisely.
It does, and that can be a barrier to entry for some users.
Right, because they might not have the technical knowledge to vet their UNL properly.
Exactly.
It's a trade-off, isn't it?
It is.
You gain efficiency and scalability,
By relying on those curated UNLs.
but you potentially sacrifice some degree of decentralization.
That's the debate.
It's a tough one.
It is, and it's a debate that's likely to continue as this technology evolves.
Okay, so decentralization is one potential sticking point.
It's a big one.
What other challenges does Ripple face?
Another big one is regulation.
Right, because cryptocurrencies are still relatively new,
They are.
and governments around the world are still grappling with how to regulate them.
It's a bit of a Wild West out there.
It is. So how could regulations impact Ripple specifically?
It could impact everything,
Oh, wow.
from how transactions are taxed
Okay.
to whether certain types of transactions are even allowed.
And different countries could have vastly different approaches, right?
Absolutely. And that could create a lot of complexity
Yeah.
and uncertainty for businesses and individuals using the Ripple network.
So navigating that regulatory landscape is going to be crucial for Ripple's long-term success.
It's going to be a key factor for sure.
Okay, so we've got the decentralization debate and the looming regulatory challenges.
Two big ones.
Anything else keeping the folks at Ripple up at night?
Well, there's always the risk of security breaches.
Right.
No system is completely invulnerable.
Right, no matter how robust the design.
Exactly. We've seen high-profile hacks and exploits in the crypto world before.
Yeah, unfortunately.
What's to stop something similar from happening to Ripple?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is, and that's where ongoing security audits,
Okay.
penetration testing, and responsible disclosure programs become super important.
So they're constantly trying to find weaknesses.
And patch them before the bad guys can exploit them.
So it's an ongoing arms race.
You could say that.
As hackers get more sophisticated, Ripple needs to constantly evolve its defenses
It's a cat and mouse game.
to keep pace.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting the network itself.
Right.
It's also about educating users
Okay.
on best practices to safeguard their own accounts.
So everyone has a role to play
It's a shared responsibility.
in keeping the system secure.
Security is a collaborative effort.
Okay, so we've covered some of the potential downsides.
Yeah, we've got to be realistic.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier.
Okay.
about the potential impact of Ripple on global finance.
You mean the potential for faster, cheaper, and more accessible cross-border payments?
Exactly. It's easy to get lost in all the technical weeds.
Right. It can get pretty complex.
But we're talking about something that could have a real, tangible impact on people's lives.
It could change the game.
You're absolutely right. Imagine a world where sending money across borders is as easy and inexpensive as sending a text message.
That's the dream.
That's the kind of future Ripple is striving to create.
It's a bold vision.
It is, and it makes all the complexities and challenges we've discussed seem worth tackling.
I agree. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
In finance.
And creating a more inclusive and efficient system for everyone.
Well said. But as you mentioned earlier, Ripple isn't without its critics.
Right. There are valid concerns out there.
And I'm curious to hear more about those concerns.
Okay.
And how they might impact the future of this technology.
Let's dive into those in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've spent the last two parts really digging into the nuts and bolts of the Ripple protocol.
We've gone pretty deep.
Yeah, we've talked about how its unique consensus algorithm tackles the challenges of security and efficiency.
Those are the big ones, right?
And we even explored how it could revolutionize global payments.
The potential is huge.
But we also need to address the elephant in the room.
You mean the criticisms?
Exactly. In the last part, you mentioned concerns about Ripple not being truly decentralized.
Okay. That's a common critique.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
It all comes down to those UNLs, the unique node lists.
Right. The buddy lists.
They're absolutely central to how Ripple achieves consensus.
Right.
But they also introduce this point of contention.
Okay.
Critics argue that relying on these pre-selected lists of validators, it kind of compromises the whole ideal of a completely decentralized system.
It seems counterintuitive.
I get that.
We've been talking about a distributed network, but now it sounds like there's a degree of centralization after all.
That's the heart of the debate.
So how does that actually work?
Well, while anyone can theoretically join the Ripple network,
Okay.
the actual process of validating transactions and securing the ledger, that's entrusted to those who are on the UNLs.
Okay.
And who gets to choose those UNLs, individuals or organizations.
So it's not as open and permissionless as, say, Bitcoin.
That's the argument some people make.
Where anyone can participate in the consensus process.
Right, and that raises questions about fairness and control.
Yeah, like what's to stop someone from stacking their UNL with nodes they control?
That's a valid concern.
Or that are sympathetic to their interest.
It creates the potential for manipulation.
Even if it's not Ripple itself doing the manipulating.
Exactly. It's more about the potential for influence.
It's like those Byzantine generals we talked about earlier.
Right.
But instead of malicious generals,
yeah,
we have potentially biased UNL curators.
It's a different kind of threat.
So how does Ripple respond to this criticism?
They argue that the default UNL they provide is designed to be diverse and trustworthy.
Okay.
Representing a broad range of stakeholders. They also emphasize that users are free to create their own UNLs.
Okay.
Choosing validators they personally trust.
So it's about user empowerment.
To a certain extent, yes.
Giving individuals the tools to make their own choices about who they trust.
But it also places a pretty significant burden on users.
Yeah.
To do their research and really understand the implications of their UNL choices.
And for someone new to the crypto space, that could be pretty daunting.
It's a steep learning curve, for sure.
It sounds like there's this tension.
Yeah.
Between the need for efficiency and security.
Which Ripple achieves through these UNLs.
Right. But also the desire for true decentralization, which remains a point of debate.
It's a classic trade-off.
Yeah, every system has its compromises.
That's true for any technology.
Okay, so decentralization is one challenge.
It's a big one.
What about the regulatory landscape?
Yes, regulation.
We touched upon that earlier.
It's a constantly evolving landscape.
How could government regulations actually impact the future of Ripple?
It's a wild card, really.
Okay.
Cryptocurrencies are still in their infancy.
Right.
And governments are struggling to keep up.
They're playing catch-up.
Exactly. We're seeing this patchwork of regulations emerging around the world.
Right.
Some more favorable to crypto than others.
So it's not a level playing field.
Not at all. And Ripple operates globally, right? That creates a lot of complexity.
I can imagine trying to navigate all those different rules and regulations.
Imagine trying to navigate a maze where the walls are constantly shifting.
That's the reality for Ripple.
It is. They have to be agile and adaptable to comply with regulations that vary so widely from country to country.
It sounds like a compliance nightmare.
It can be a challenge, for sure.
What kind of specific regulatory hurdles could they face?
Everything from anti-money laundering and know your customer rules.
Okay.
To restrictions on certain types of transactions.
Right.
Or even outright bans in some jurisdictions.
Oh, wow. So it could be that extreme.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of taxation.
Right. How do you even tax something that doesn't fit neatly into existing categories?
It's a square peg in a round hole.
It really is, and it creates so much uncertainty for Ripple.
And for the whole crypto space.
Clarity and consistency in regulation will be key.
Absolutely. It will foster innovation and adoption.
So they're not just dealing with technical challenges.
Right.
They're also dealing with political and legal hurdles.
It's a multifaceted challenge.
It sounds like it. Okay, so we've got the decentralization debate and the regulatory maze.
Two big ones.
Any other potential roadblocks we should be aware of?
Well, we've touched on security.
Right.
But it's worth reiterating that no system is foolproof.
Yeah.
The history of technology is littered with examples of seemingly secure systems being breached.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
Ripple, despite its sophisticated design, is not immune to that risk.
That's a sobering thought.
It's important to be realistic.
What kind of security threats should we be thinking about?
Everything from exploits targeting vulnerabilities in the code
Okay.
to social engineering attacks that trick users into giving up their credentials.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's
Right.
also about human behavior.
Precisely. And that's why ongoing security audits,
Right.
penetration testing, and responsible disclosure programs are so crucial.
It's about constantly probing for weaknesses.
And proactively patching them before malicious actors can exploit them.
It's a never-ending battle, isn't it?
It is.
The good guys versus the bad guys in the digital realm.
You could say that.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
I'm glad you found it informative.
We've explored the intricacies of Ripple's technology,
Fascinating stuff.
the potential it holds for revolutionizing global payments,
The possibilities are exciting.
and the very real challenges it faces.
Yeah, we got to be honest about those too.
It's clear that the journey is far from over.
This is just the beginning.
So for our listeners who are eager to learn more,
There's a ton of information out there.
we'll be sure to include links to the Ripple protocol documentation, some independent analyses
And other resources.
in the show notes.
It's a rabbit hole worth going down.
It is, and I would encourage everyone to approach this space with a healthy dose of curiosity and skepticism.
That's the right mindset.
Do your research, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge assumptions.
The future of finance is being shaped right now.
It is.
And it's up to all of us to be informed participants in this technological revolution.
Absolutely well said. Knowledge is power.
It really is.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.